The Compliance Life details the journey to and in the role of a Chief Compliance Officer. How does one come to sit in the CCO chair? What are some of the skills a CCO needs to successfully navigate the compliance waters in any company? What are some of the top challenges CCOs have faced, and how did they meet them? These questions and many others will be explored in this new podcast series. The Compliance Life is hosted by Tom Fox, and each month he'll present the story of one CCO through 4 episodes. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm extraordinarily pleased to welcome you to another 4-week episode of The Compliance Life. In the month of September, I'll be visiting with DeAnna Nwankwo. DeAnna has been most recently the Chief Compliance Officer at Core Laboratories, where she served from 2003 to May 2020. In that capacity, she led Core Laboratories' ethics and compliance activities. In this role, she reported to the General Counsel and Secretary and to the Audit Committee of the Board of Directors. She was responsible for formulating and implemented Core Lab's ethics policies and procedures, including its Code of Ethics and Corporate Responsibility Statement, making sure they were communicated and training across all company lines. She managed the company's helpline resources and served as the final internal resource which concerned parties could communicate after other formal channels and resources were exhausted. As Chief Compliance Officer, she was authorized to implement all necessary actions to ensure achievement of objectives of an effective compliance program. In her role, she collaborated with other functional departments, including internal audit, human resources, information security, to receive and direct compliance issues for the company. DeAnna has a great story. It's well worth listening to. I know you'll enjoy it, and I know you'll learn a lot. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. Tom Fox, back again for another episode of The Compliance Life. We're in episode 1 of a 4-part series with DeAnna Nwankwo. I hope I got that right. DeAnna, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with me and telling us a little bit about your story.
Yes. Hi, and good morning, Tom. Thank you for having me. And yes, you did pronounce the last name correctly, Nwankwo. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you regarding my compliance life.
Yeah, DeAnna, you have named this episode Good News, Bad News. You're the compliance officer, and how you became the CCO. So I was wondering if you just could start at the beginning and then tell us how you got to the CCO chair.
Sure. So my path to the CCO chair is different from quite a few other CCOs, as we've learned through the past few podcasts that you've produced. And so mine is no different in that it was different. So prior to becoming a CCO, I was in the quality field. I was a quality professional for 20 years prior to. I worked at the Johnson Space Center for about 10 years in their environmental health laboratory as a quality assurance coordinator, and then moved from there, got a promotion to work for a company that was called Pace Analytical Services at the time, and I was their quality manager. And I had been with Pace Analytical Services for about a year when I received a call from a good friend of mine who was working at Core Laboratories, who was going to be transitioning out of her position. So she wanted me to interview for that position. Again, it was a quality position. And I said, well, I don't know if I'm ready to do that because I've only been in my current position for about a year. She said, oh, well, what do you have to lose? I said, okay. So we went on the interview, and strangely enough, I got the job. And so Core Lab hired me initially in January of 2003 to work as a quality assurance coordinator for one of their business units. Well, at the time, I reported to the then corporate compliance officer. Her name was Ann Rosecrans. And I remember times past wanting to work with Ann because she was well known, well respected in the quality field. And to be honest with you, I didn't know what a compliance officer did. So I worked with Ann, started in January again, in my quality role. Strangely enough, she calls me into her office May of that year to tell me that she was going to be leaving the company, and that she was going to resign and move to the West Coast. She was going to do something different. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I really hadn't spent a lot of time with her because, again, I was trying to get to know my new role. Well, in the same conversation that she's having with me about her pending departure, she then says, oh, and by the way, I've spoken with the then GC and told him that you would make a great compliance officer. You just needed to, to have a little hand holding and have someone to walk alongside you until you learn what the position entails. And I thought to myself, wow, well, that's interesting. I don't know what a compliance officer does. So for the next 4 or 5, I think it was about 5 months, I was sort of walked through what a corporate compliance officer does by the then general counsel, who then says to me, round about September or October of that same year, he calls me into his office and he says, I have good news and I have bad news. Which do you want first? I said, it doesn't really matter. I said, you can, tell me either one. I'm happy to hear either one first. And so he says, congratulations, you're the compliance officer. And I have bad news. You're the compliance officer. And so I kind of sat in silence for what felt like 5 minutes. I'm sure it was just a couple of minutes. And I thought to myself, he just said, good news, you're the compliance officer. And then he says, bad news, you're the compliance officer. And I thought, I think I've just been promoted. That was my first introduction to, oh, by the way, you are now our corporate compliance officer. Well, I will fast forward a little bit to my first year as corporate compliance officer. And at the time I was having my performance evaluation, I'll never forget these words that the GC spoke to me. He said, DeAnna, I'm very pleased with your performance. I'm very pleased with the job that you're doing. But he said, I need for you to become comfortable with your power and your authority. And Tom, those words stuck in my mind, and I still remember it as clear as day to this very day, because where certainly I had positions of responsibility, I did not have the authority to actually carry out my position. And so when he said that to me, I thought, wow, this is new. This is different. And so to solidify that, we were in, I had to give a presentation. I gave my first presentation to a group of operations managers, and he comes in at the tail end of that presentation. Of course, the presentation was on our code of ethics. And he says to the group, he says, so you've met DeAnna Nwankwo, our corporate compliance officer. And he said, there are 2 things I want you to be aware of. 1, I fully support her in her position. And 2, I have no problem firing anyone who goes against her in any way in her official capacity as corporate compliance officer. And Tom, I had never had that happen before in my position. And so I felt very empowered. And I felt like, even though I didn't know a lot at the time, that I was going to be given the opportunity to grow into that position, to learn it, to understand it, to expand and increase my knowledge in regards to corporate compliance. And I am very glad I did.
Listening to you, I was going to say, it doesn't sound like you were thrown in the deep end of the pool. It sounded like you were helicoptered out to the middle of the Atlantic and dropped in. But it also sounded like they had a lifeboat right there with you to support you. You're absolutely right. I don't think I have ever heard that strong a statement, particularly to a new-ish or around and or in front of a new-ish CCO. That really must have given you a great deal of comfort.
It did. It really did. Because again, not really knowing at that point in time what the position entailed. I knew, though, that I would have his full support as long as I did my job to the best of my ability. So I was very, very comfortable. At that point in time, I thought, yeah, this is going to be okay. And so I actually enjoyed about a little over 17 years, about 17 and a half year career there, until, being laid off at the end of May due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
DeAnna, I'm sure we'll dive into some of these skills in later episodes, but I wanted to ask, what was the skill set you brought as a QA/QC professional to the compliance chair, different than a lawyer might bring? So I'm a lawyer by professional background, but you get from a very different perspective. What do you think that allowed you to bring to the CCO chair?
Yeah, I think having a good understanding of quality management systems, everything from, risk assessment to corrective actions and root cause analysis, and, working with, across what's the word I'm looking for? Across functional positions. I brought that with me. With the quality assurance background, auditing. I was and still am a certified quality auditor. So I understood what doing a good audit was. I understood what obtaining facts was. I understood what that meant. I brought good interviewing techniques with me. So it's not like I had nothing to work with. I did have a certain skill set that I knew I could build upon.
DeAnna, when I think of QA/QC, I tend to think of that role around a specific product or service. But listening to you there, it sounded like the role of a QA/QC professional can be, and indeed is, quite broader. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, that is indeed fair. It is broad. And the thing that I really appreciate about quality assurance professionals and corporate compliance professionals is that wide range of knowledge and expertise that one can bring to the table and be successful in both or either role.
DeAnna, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us for episode 2, where we take a look at what the compliance officer does. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to this episode of The Compliance Life. I hope you will join me again next week, where I take up another episode in The Compliance Life. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you would like to be featured on The Compliance Life, please give me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, if you like this series, please give us a rating on iTunes. Any review and rating would definitely help get the word out about the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks again.